Former Defense Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa has been elected as the new Speaker of the National Assembly. She took her oath of office in front of members of Parliament this afternoon following a secret ballot. But her election faced resistance, with some opposition parties and civil society groups citing several scandals linked to her. Mapisa was up against Democratic Alliance MP Dr. Anneli Lotriet. Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe presided over the vote.
There were two nominees, Mapisa Ngagula, 199 votes, 199. The second nominee, Lotriet, 82 votes. Spoiled votes, let me finish. Spoiled votes, 17. That's 17. Votes that were cancelled or reissued, 0. The total number of votes were 298. In terms of item 6 of Part A, Schedule 3 to the Constitution, I accordingly declare Honorable Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngagula duly elected as the Speaker of the National Assembly.
And so with us tonight to take a look at the current electoral system and ask whether is it time for a change or a reform of South Africa's electoral system. To talk to us is One South Africa movement leader, Mmusi Maimane, My Vote Counts electoral systems researcher, Letlhogonolo, Letshele, as well as political analyst and senior lecturer at the University of the Free State, Professor Sethulego Matebisi. And to be a part of this conversation tonight, WhatsApp your questions and your comments to 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Good evening to you all, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me, and good evening to our fellow panelists, and good evening to fellow South Africans.
Mmusi, I want to begin with you because you have been in that parliament and you have been in that system. So we'll start at the end and then we'll kind of work our way back to actually understanding how the party list proportional representation system actually came to being, its features and its effect in our democratic dispensation. But would you say what we saw today at play in that National Assembly is the downside of having the party list electoral system, a closed party list for that matter, system at play, where it is criticized, for example, for not giving the voter an opportunity to determine the identity of the person who will represent them, nor even give it the opportunity to reject an individual that they feel has poorly performed?
Well, therein lies our greatest crisis. The drafters of our Constitution, I think, envisaged that post the 1994 elections, where, if you'll remember, they wanted to set a threshold for what party representation could look like, diversify that. They envisaged a sunset on this current proportional representative model to get back to a truly all constituency-based model. And so what naturally has happened today is the outcome of not reforming that system, because in effect, the party dominance means that you can ignore ethical conduct, in that you can elect a speaker who is facing an investigation. You can suffer from majoritarianism, in that actually Parliament itself fails to do the job of being able to interrogate its own processes. And ultimately, you don't have to be beholden to the will of the people in between elections, because naturally you can simply say, we won an election, we've got the majority, and we can make a choice. And if we want to say to you, as I have been a member of Parliament over years, as I have seen that, in fact, ultimately, if a party says a fire pool is a swimming pool, or a swimming pool is a fire pool, then they can vote to say it is. And I think today, as South Africans, we need to reflect on this day and realize that today demonstrates the weaknesses of party dominance, a party dominant state, but it also demonstrates ultimately that MPs cannot go against the party, even if they feel they might have a grievance, that their duty to protect the constitution of the republic is undermined by their duty to defend their party.
Yeah.
So I think today we need to reform.
I mean, it's a system, Mmusi, that is still applied in probably about 83 countries, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe even less or more. But it is, one would say, a system that also gave us Mmusi Maimane. So why are we knocking it today? It's the same system that gave us the late statesman Nelson Mandela. It's the same system that gives us other parties like UDM, EFF, for example. That is the system which, in its sense, was thought to be a good system, that it will give us high quantity and quality of ideas that will be produced, because there will be a number of parties that will participate in that system.
This goes to the core of why I felt I couldn't stay within the system. Because within the current system, and even someone like President Nelson Mandela recognized that the system was unworkable. Even President Kgalema Motlanthe in the high-level panel report recognizes that the system is not workable. Whilst it elects people to parliament, it fails accountability. To your point, let me give you a very practical opposite point as we sit here today. Not only are the events of today emblematic of it, but actually if you look at the last year of a COVID pandemic, we've been executive-led, which is ultimately that the executive has made a decision to say, here are the regulations, people must live with them, not debate them. And for over a year, we've had members of parliament who effectively have been doing nothing. They have been practically useless to the people of South Africa, because there's no new legislation that has come on board. There's no way of us managing disaster management. And this is the consequence. So to me, even though the Van Zyl Slabbert, even Parliament itself realized that it was not workable for it to effect legislation that works for people, accountability of members of Parliament. So I think it's long overdue. I think the best service that this administration could give is to reform the system. And then the last point I'd say is, what advantages could we glean? The advantage is this, is that if we put a constituency-based model, suddenly even things like budget votes, votes for speakers, must be mandated by the people and for the people, which is what the Constitutional Court, in fact, tasked Parliament to do, to say, you need to get back to restoring power to the people. Because at this point in time, the only people who can wield power are the political parties, and that's why I'm working to build a grassroots movement that can restore that power back to the people.
We'll come back in a moment to talk of the features of that constituency system and what it actually means. But Letlhogonolo, how did we come to a point where we said it was okay and we accepted a system that empowers political parties rather than voters and gives control to the parties on who gets elected to a very powerful position like that of the Speaker of the National Assembly?
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers at home. I mean, I don't think that was the objective, at the time. Remember, we were coming from the period of apartheid, and the biggest concern there was to foster national healing and reconciliation. So the PR system came about, as a result of it being simple and it being able to get representation. So that was the ideal model at the time, and it worked at the time. But we need to contend with the fact that it was never meant to stay. It was meant to only serve the 1994 elections. But I mean, since then, we know there's been attempts to get electoral reform going, but that has not happened. Mmusi alluded to the Van Zyl Slabbert report that has been tabled since 2002, 2003, and it has not been acted on. So coupled with that, and also the growing lack of accountability as a result of the PR system, we find ourselves in this situation where we have political parties, being the ones that determine who makes it to parliament. I mean, you as a voter go vote, but I mean, your power ends at the ballot, because now you cannot determine who makes it to parliament. I mean, political parties draw their own list of people who they prefer. So there's absolutely no power that the voter has. And as a result of that, you get a situation where politicians are more, beholden or more loyal to political parties as opposed to the voters who put them there in the first place. See, so those are the certain deficiencies or the defects of the PR system at the moment that we're grappling with. So we're trying to kind of ensure or foster greater accountability by trying to introduce a constituency-based system that's kind of hanging at the moment with the Concord judgment ruling that came last year.
Yeah. Large parties, Prof. Matebisi, would you say, are they losing touch with the social issues that are plaguing South Africans, and therefore it's time for the system to change and maybe get independent candidates in there, and maybe they'll be more in touch with what the local communities want and what they are saying, for example, about individuals that they would like representing them?
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to South Africans as well. Well, one should understand, I strongly believe that any political party, whether it's in South Africa or elsewhere in the world that finds itself in the position of the African National Congress, will perhaps act the same. Yes, the system was the right one at a certain time in our history, but what do we now expect the African National Congress to work proactively to actually hand over power? Because if they're going to accede to changing the system, that simply means that they are going to lose power. And I strongly believe that if the system, the electoral system is changed, we're going to see a different ANC, an ANC that is responsive not only to the needs of their own members, but also an ANC that is responsive to the interests and the needs of South Africans. But that, I think we will have to wait much, much, much longer. And that is why the African National Congress can afford to do the things that I do. And I just briefly want to mention one. The ANC celebrates and rewards, non-performance. And we've seen it several times. There's credible evidence where there are serious allegations against a mayor, a premier, elsewhere. But then that person turning up somewhere else in a higher position. And those are the issues that actually erode trust within the political system. And I strongly believe that our opposition parties have tried, but they have also failed dismally to try and advance the interest of South Africans. And that's why there are many households, as we speak, who do not even have access to a slice of bread, and it is a huge problem in South Africa, whereas we had political parties which needs to advance the interest of South Africans.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, Prof, I want to come back to that point, why you're saying the reforms to our electoral system would take much, much longer to begin to be felt in the system, and I want to hear what Mmusi Maimane says about that. Does he envisage that introducing independent candidates will immediately taper down the power that is entrenched at political party headquarters? And welcome back live with us tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405, in conversation with Mmusi Maimane, Letlhogonolo, Letshele, as well as Professor Sethulego Matebisi. And we are talking party list proportional representation system and the reforms that are required to entrench a little bit more accountability and enforce that accountability, and that enforcement coming from the voter point of view. Let's hear your views. 072-110-5584. So, Prof, let's get back to that question. You're saying the reforms, right? For example, what we are hearing now coming out of the Constitutional Court is that even for the national and the provincial vote, independent candidates will now be allowed to stand without being inside a political party, because previously the system was such that you only had to be in a political party to be able to stand. My sense is that the dominance of the African National Congress might still remain in that particular system. Why do you think it will take longer, in your view?
No, well, to start with, you've got a Democratic Alliance, and you've got the EFS, whom I regard as the strongest opposition parties, actually the leading opposition parties in South Africa. They have been battling to unseat the African National Congress. And by the way, with all the financial support, you don't win elections by filling up stadiums or getting likes on the social media. So here we're talking about individuals. It should be individuals, even if they have the financial support. My question is, will they have the footprint and to be able to garner enough support. You might get an individual who will get enough support within one city where that particular individual, independent candidate, emanates from or originates from, but that is a problem. The African National Congress wins elections not only because of the support that they do, and I've seen it several times, even on the day of the election, how they will go out, their foot soldiers going out, knock on doors, and for that, you will need active, foot soldiers and the EFF, and to a certain extent, the Democratic Alliance for the past couple of years have battled to do that. And that's why I say for the next 10 to 15 years, I can't see suddenly that an independent candidate will come and unseat the African National Congress. Yes, they may come in and play a significant role. And we've seen what is happening at municipal level, where you've got one representative, whether it's an independent candidate, but that independent candidate becoming a kingmaker in terms of who is running that municipality. But if you look at the composition at national level, it is a larger proportion, 400 people, and I can't see whether 3 or 4 independent candidates coming in that will suddenly disrupt what I think has become an entrenched situation where the ANC each time there's a vote, it is even guaranteed that the ANC, despite its internal problem, will definitely convincingly win that vote.
Mmusi Maimane, jump in here. That the criticism that is leveled against this mix system of the PR system and an independent candidate is that all we're really going to see is an increase of wasted votes.
I tend to disagree. We tabled a draft electoral reform bill that attends to some of those questions. Firstly, I think we can, at one level, celebrate that independence can stand if the NC can vote in that regard. But I think we mustn't miss the second principle, is that you want to reform the country into a constituency-based model, which moves naturally to the third objective that you've got to achieve, is that in the constituency, who is the candidate? In a closed party list system, the member of parliament for that community becomes a secret. Whereas in an open party list system, you could say, even if you say, this is candidate X of the ANC and candidate Y of the DA and Z of this party and that of the independents, you at least know that person is. So imagine during these recent riots or insurrection, whatever you want to call it. Imagine if the MP for Phoenix was standing up. Accountability could be felt, because then we would be dealing directly with the person. The same way as if you know who the ward councillor is in your community, even if it's the ANC, even if it's whatever. But the first principle we've got to establish is transparency in democracy that makes sure that our elected officials are known to us. That was a proposal. And what breaks the power of that is that accountability at national level. Now suddenly people could not say, if a constituency, if the people of Dobsonville, where I'm at, said, actually, we want a school in our community, and the member of parliament could not do that, regardless of which party or if they were independent. They then have the right to go to parliament, and if it's so needed for them to vote against their chief whip or their party, it's the party cannot remove them because they are elected by the people. And if you do remove them on that basis, you have to go back to the people and seek another mandate. That is the power of the reform we are seeking. It then restores power back to the people. That's why we are piloting it even in local government, and ultimately saying at national government, we must know who represents whom. That's a power of the system.
How well has it worked at local government?
Well, in many ways, I think that at local government, in certain communities, it's worked relatively well, where you find that associations or independent associations have come on board and been able to stand and represent. There is a diversity of parties at local government in many ways. And because of that same system, let's be fair to ourselves, where we've seen significant changes and strides. I can remember in 2016, we were able to shift the metros to Johannesburg, Tshwane, Nelson Mandela Bay, not only because parties did well, but because you could target particular constituencies. And where a party had a corrupt candidate, you could say, but this candidate is not.
But the other argument is that led to a lot of stagnation at local government level because of the effect of it is more parties and therefore a need for coalitions. And if there are these issues around the APC and the ANC, and then the budget is not passed, and that creates a whole lot of instability in those local governments. All it does, it just fragments the system a whole lot and creates too many political parties or too many pockets that need to be pleased.
Actually, its greatest power is that it breaks state capture. Because let me say this to you. If you've got a majoritarian system, as you would purport to suggest that, well, if one party wins outright and they are strong, that's how you get state capture. Because people stop thinking and they vote simply as voting cattle and ultimately end up, if you buy one, you get the whole party for free. But in this model that we are proposing, is that if you buy one and you corrupt one, it's only that one who is corrupt. But furthermore, democracy is about engagement and dialogue. If you say you just want majoritarianism, you end up with state capture. If you go the other way, actually I can remember when even a political party like the EFF was simply saying we're demanding a decrease in the rates of the city in this way, and one party was saying another thing. I was part of the negotiations where you suddenly had to listen to more people, and it was better for the people of Johannesburg, the outcome that came from there. Therefore, I maintain that the future of this country must be a negotiated one, ultimately where people must lobby for votes. Imagine if the president suddenly now, instead of reshuffling the flat tires in a vehicle and hoping he gets a better ride, but actually could now suddenly I have to go consult broadly beyond my own party. You could suddenly get a better cabinet than what we have at the moment. So I think we've got this hegemonic view that says that the ANC will govern forever. It's actually majoritarianism. To be fair, it's broader state capture, high levels of unemployment, serious levels of poverty. I disagree also with the view that says at national level, independents or certainly people who come from communities won't make it. I actually think there's a greater opportunity. That's how it shows that actually political and public representation can come beyond political parties. Suddenly you can have business people being engaged. You can have civic society people being engaged, where you can broaden the pool of people who represent us, so that when they end up in parliament, you are not only just dealing with party lists and party acts who are representing.
But Letlhogonolo, is that not the same argument that is raised about the PR system, that it gives political space, which allows parties, multiracial, multi-ethnic lists of candidates to participate, even more so that you're more likely that you will have a woman elected into a position of power. So it promotes the advancement of women politicians. And many are arguing that that's exactly what has happened here. Sethulego Matebisi is a woman because of the party PR system. The party is able to decide that more women can get into that list and advance to top positions.
I mean, those are internal ANC, constitution. I can't say, but I mean, the issue that we're trying to fix here is the issue of accountability. And when you introduce the constituency-based system, you are actually linking the politician to the constituent. If there's no service delivery, the voters can come and knock at your door and say, by the way, you promised us water and this is not happening. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Mmusi rightly put it that the PR system put us in a situation of state capture, in a situation of unemployment. I mean, let's take today for an example. I mean, the appointment of Mapisa, threatened, the separation of power, because I mean the president was able to simply, take Mapisa and put her into parliament. Just it's like an imposition. So and parliament is an independent institution, but there was that, abuse of power in that instance, because only the president makes decisions at the executive level, but he was able to kind of compromise appointments in parliament. The election of the speaker was supposed to have started in the assembly, and the president was able to compromise that process simply because of the PR system. So if you have a different system altogether. That's not how it's going to function. I mean, we are anticipating a new system, and hopefully we're going to, raise such issues, by the way, that, okay, how do we hold our representatives accountable, at the various levels of the system. So I think the issue here is it's about accountability more than anything, because we are currently grappling with the impact of the lack of accountability of the PR system. So the one thing that's going to be important as well is the voter education. I think your perspective is more pessimistic simply because you are saying that the ANC has got a big geographic dominance, which is true. But I mean, I think there will be space for voter education, from everybody, from the media, from civil society, to kind of introduce, this set of new rules of how we appoint people, of a new electoral system. So let's give it a chance. And I also like the idea of we're going to have a different pool of ideas in parliament. So I think that can attract more voters, because we're currently seeing a decline in voter apathy. So I think it's high time that we reform how we elect our representatives, so that we can hold them accountable simply because they reside in the same constituency. I don't know if you know about the constituency system that we currently have at the moment, where MPs are simply just given constituencies to look after. And there's not even a requirement for the member of parliament to be living in that constituency. For all you know, you could have a politician living in Sandton and being in charge of some constituency somewhere in Hammanskraal, where they have no idea of the daily situations or the daily living situation of those people. So there's absolutely no accountability. So that's why we're trying to mend with reforms that are going to come in.
All right. Let's take a break, and I want to come back to exactly that question that you are raising of a constituency-based system, and many are saying that they're criticizing that system to say, well, if you have that constituency-based system, then you'll have a leadership at national, but particularly focused on issues that are happening at local and not looking at the broader situation of what's happening in the broad society. But I'll have you guys weigh in on that when we come back in a moment. Let's head to you. Welcome back live with us tonight on In Focus. Of course, the conversation sparked by today, earlier afternoon's election of Newzroom Afrika as the new Speaker of the National Assembly. Many saying, well, it's just simply the system that we're operating in. It allows for this excessive entrenchment of power within one political party, and therefore the political party is able to pick and elect who gets into particular positions without giving you, the voter, the opportunity to object or even reject a particular individual if you feel they have underperformed. So we're asking the question, what are the features and the effects of the closed party list proportional representation system that has been in South Africa up until this point? Prof, more votes will come out of the constituency system and a better pool of ideas. Just weigh in on that, but also weigh in on some of the cons, right? You know, the pros and the cons of a constituency system. The constituency system, others criticizing it of being a system that would bring in lesser stability in policies, in a way that otherwise you'd have regular changes, switches of ideology, depending on who's there, and that will make, for example, the process of economic planning a little bit more difficult. But not only that, if you have a constituency-based leader, he'll be more focused on local issues than having a national perspective on the issues.
No, not necessarily, and I don't completely disagree with my two panelists. I think we should be realistic. It's a good idea. On paper, it looks good, but it's going to be a huge struggle to implement that. If we just briefly pause and look at what is currently happening at local government level, all the independents that we currently have took a time for South Africans to realize that they can actually vote for an independent candidate. But the problem, as Letlhogonolo also alluded to, is an issue of accountability. And that's why we're still grappling with the question that people go and vote for the ruling party, but a couple of months later, they go to the street, burning down facilities and all that. They're actually moving between the party and civil society. And that is also indicative that people are not satisfied with the system, but perhaps they do not have an alternative. Now, if you've got this other system, I think that to a certain extent will enable people to make a significant contribution. And I think also those independent candidates will also have the interest of the country at heart, irrespective of whether they've just been elected for 5 years. I don't think they will just necessarily ignore the fact that they also have to build democracy in South Africa.
Yeah. Would you bring that down to the fact that there was not sufficient, or there still isn't sufficient voter education around what a constituency-based system would actually entail?
No, well, this just simply relates to South Africa. If you look at the whole issue of vaccination currently, I mean, we've got a serious problem. And the IEC, Independent Electoral Commission, is doing a wonderful job in terms of educating South Africans. But it seems as if South Africans has embraced this notion that perhaps they do not have the democratic right to make a significant change politically wise. And that's why I say, yes, it will take time, but we should also not get tired in terms of continuing to provide voter education to South Africans on many different platforms in the language that people understand and in different formats. We can't use the social media to try and reach as many people as possible. But at the end of the day, there are those communities and South African citizens that needs to be targeted in completely different ways. And the IEC have tried to do that. But also, if you look at the voter turnout at municipal level, it is a huge concern. It compares well with other countries if you look at the average voter turnout. But at the end of the day, that is also indicative that something is wrong. People perhaps have lost trust in our political system, and we need to come up with other means to try and educate South Africans about their responsibility and to advance democracy in this country.
Right, Mmusi Maimane, I know you disagree with this notion. It's not my view, by the way. It's the pros and cons that are put out there for each various system and what are the advantages and the disadvantages of each one. And the constituency system is criticized for having a constituency leader that focuses on local issues more than having a national perspective on issues. But the other thing is the possibility of a chopping and changing of ideologies which could hamper economic planning?
Well, I think on the first, when you do this kind of reform, naturally there are multiple implications that follow on from that. But I think the first important, almost if you like, starting point is to say the Constitution prescribes what the various tiers of or spheres of government do. So if a member of parliament is engaged with potholes, they are traversing terrain that is not prescribed for national government, because it's not their job to deal with basic service delivery in that manner. That is only allocated to the sphere of government, which is local government. But a member of parliament in this regard would have to look at what is the mandate prescribed in the Constitution for what national government's objectives are, such as education, healthcare, the very big economic issues that we look at. That's the first. The second issue is that no one is proposing a complete 100% everyone must be constituency allocated. Even at a national level, the prescription is that you need 300 constituency-based or 100 PR-based. Now, on that PR space, nothing stops you from being able to say on that list, you want economists, you want healthcare specialists, you want various people who deal with the competence of what national government is designed to do. It's precisely the work that when we proposed in our draft electoral law to say there must be a single transferable vote. It's not just to simply say you are voting for the person in the constituency, but that there's another person that you also can have a right to vote for who may bring particular specialist areas. To the last point that you raised about ideology and all of that, I think we are living in a society today where because the capture of state has occurred, and by the way, it doesn't begin with corruption. The capture of state is also the capture of bureaucracy. When you deploy your people you want to a particular position, regardless of their competence, will be exposed for what it is, because now suddenly public representatives, which are members of parliament, must do that work, and the bureaucracy must be capacitated to follow the constitutional imperatives and the ideals to which society must go. So that ultimately you have a political system that is independent and doing its own jobs and providing oversight, and a bureaucracy that is supposed to work. Because at this point in time, even some bureaucrats act as politicians, and therefore naturally, they then are only beholden to the party, rather than in fact, the fact that they are bureaucrats designed to serve regardless of which party comes on board. Then to the point that Letlhogonolo made, our constitution envisages that there are constituency offices in all parts of the country. That's why when you designed this system, it wasn't so that it can be permanent. A member of parliament works 3 days of the week, and the rest of the time are allocated for what is called constituency period. They follow the same timetable as the school terms, so that the rest of the time is not that they can have a holiday, but they can have constituency period. Where we make a mistake is that those constituency offices become captured so that the politician run those for their party purposes, that when an ordinary member who needs a pit latrine fixed, a school repaired, a hospital, vaccine program, they can't go there if they are not members of that party. So it ends up with a further corruption where even housing and the very government programs are allocated on a party basis, rather than in fact the constitutional imperative that says we have a bureaucracy that is set up for the citizens, and that your first oath is to the Constitution.
And would you say that would be the thing that has destroyed this link between the voters and their representatives?
Absolutely, because now suddenly people don't A, know who their representatives are, and B, they feel that if their representative is not from the party of their choice, then that person no longer can represent them. And that becomes then the net consequence of the fact that these constituency offices become useless. We have to reform the system, live with its consequences, and in the long run, ultimately, if we learn anything even from Zambia, the elections that have taken place now, is that in a direct election system, change becomes possible, and that's the first step of accountability. And that's what forces people to focus on economic plans that can deliver jobs, deliver the sort of outputs that we want. If we carry on the way we are carrying on, you and I will look at our grandkids and realize that they are still suffering under the liberation era or the ANC era, rather than looking at how we change not only the system, but bring on new leaders who can focus on the future.
Right, welcome back. You're live with us tonight here on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405 in focus. And the conversation is around the closed party list proportional representation system currently working in our political system here, or electoral system here in South Africa. Its features and its effects, one of which we saw at play this afternoon with the election of the Speaker of the National Assembly, where the extreme power that is rested or vested within a political party dominated that National Assembly, and that vote, of course, was successful. There is, of course, Mmusi, one question coming through on WhatsApp saying, I don't understand why Mmusi Maimane has a problem with a democratically elected person being put into the position by a legitimate party. There it is from Anonymous saying, I fail to understand why people like Mmusi Maimane have a problem with a party that is democratically elected into power and exercising its power by voting a person whom they prefer.
That's not the debate, with respect. All of us want anyone who's democratically elected to be entitled to do so. But what I have a problem with is the fact that if that party relies on a closed list system, that you and I, if all fairness, do not know the people in the list, then can I truly say I knew up front that when I look at the list of the party, there are no criminals, there are no racists, there are no alcoholics, all of those types of dynamics. That is the question that we are opposing. And what we're saying is, open up the list so that we all know, so that by the time somebody stands for position of speaker or president or whatever, we all know that. Imagine if a community said, I know that this person who is representing me was involved in VBS looting. Then would I go and say, I'm exercising my right to vote for somebody who has looted? Yeah. That's the question. State capture is occurring in front of us and no one is facing the consequences. Therein lies my issue. It's not about democracy.
Letlhogonolo, why did new parties fail to do exactly that? I mean, if we look at the last 3 decades, I mean, there are many people who've decided, look, this majority party is no longer for us, because clearly we are seeing, in as far as the number of votes that they're getting, they're decreasing, even though many would argue that they're not decreasing because they're going to another party. People are just staying out of the voting process. But we've seen new parties that come and promise new ideas, Al-Jamals, the NFPs, and so on and so forth. Why has that new party dispensation not achieved the same kind of effect?
I mean, you know, with smaller political parties and emerging parties, they've been facing difficulties, you know, in destabilizing the dominance of the ANC. You know, I mean, party funding comes into play in terms of the amount of money, you know, that political parties have. I mean, Prof did say that, you know, to campaign for an election requires a lot of resources. I mean, you have to do advertising, rallies, and so forth. So those you need those resources to attract voters. So with smaller parties, they are unable to do so. They are unable to tap into, you know, new voters, tap into new areas in order to gain voters. So they are unable to reach the voters. So with the PR system, it's been that issue. And remember, the money that's allocated to them is allocated on a proportional basis. So as things stand, the ANC will always receive a large chunk of the money from the party funding from the state. So it's not going to be fair. So they are unable to do that. So they remain, you know, stillborns or little babies in parliament and are unable.
How different then would a constituency-based system be as far as the distribution of money to support your campaigning?
I mean, at the moment we haven't gotten that far to discuss the intricacies of a constituency-based system. But I mean, we know that it will be mixed, so we'll have PR seats and then there'll be constituency-based. I mean, I think it can be equal in terms of who gets what, but I mean, it might be also difficult because there'll be PR seats and then there'll be independent candidates, so that might be difficult to determine at the moment.
Yeah, Mmusi, have you worked out those intricacies?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, when you deal with a political party, it spends, as I think Nombula Mokonyane had said, that to run an election, you need close to R1 billion. And that's not an obscene amount from a party political system point of view, to elect people we don't know. If we brought it down to a constituency-based model around an individual, the amounts would not be the same, A. And B, it would be incumbent upon that individual to declare to the people where that income comes from. And then the quantum of money doesn't matter. Because if someone has a compelling message, and even if they spent 10 million in a community, it's 10 million that we would know, okay, person X got this money from this person, this is how they work, and these are the rewards, and whether we think that's fair or not can be expressed at the ballot paper. But if we do not actually get to knowing the individual themselves, then the party creates this lump sum that it builds upon itself, and we never quite know the consequences of what happens in that financial space.
Right, let's have a look at more messages coming through tonight on WhatsApp, 072-110-584. Selo Morabe Koval saying the challenge with the current setup, it favors the corrupt, which has a big number of representatives in parliament. They don't vote with their hearts, but with their ANC membership cards. Tando in Rustenburg saying the constituency-based electoral system is the way to go. With the current PR system, politicians account for themselves and their parties. Pindile saying a total reform and an about turn is needed in our electoral system for one simple reason: we cannot build a new house with old material and expect new results. and Jola in the Eastern Cape, saying the present electoral system where you vote for the party is failing the voters. You vote for the party, and when the party wins, they choose their people without consulting the voters, even if the person is not favored or unknown by the voters. All right, successor there, Mahlangu Kaya, on Twitter rather, saying the Concord had ordered Parliament to ensure independent candidates can run for MP positions in the next national election. But then, who will hold Parliament if they fail? All right, Prof. Matebisi, I mean, we are assuming that, of course, independent candidates will come in and they will become successful. What if they don't become successful? Because I think there's also, Mmusi will correct me here, but Prof, you just weigh in, a threshold that you would need to get in a number of votes that would allow you to even have a seat in Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's common cause. In most constituencies, you'd need close to about, we would argue probably, they vary across the country in size, but I would say perhaps conservatively between 50 to 60,000 gives you one seat in the current model. So it would be kind of similar numbers. But here's the power behind it. It would ultimately mean that a political party could not in one constituency be able to field more candidates. It would only have to field one so that that constituency is really given an expression of choice. And I think given an appropriate campaign, you could really see success in this regard when you break down those numbers in easier and smaller chunks for people to participate.
Prof, will we be caught in a situation where we'll say, okay, maybe let's try another system, because clearly that one did not quite work?
No, not at all. I wholeheartedly support the new system which is been tabled, but as I've indicated from the outset, it's going to be a huge task for South Africans to be able to compete with the African National Congress. And there's this notion that certain members of the African National Congress is irrational. We should remember, you've got these ardent ANC supporters, irrespective of what the party is facing. They will forever vote for the party, and nobody can blame them for that. And that's why I say, I hear what Mmusi says, and I hear what, even if you now get somebody with all the necessary resources, it's that individual will need a lot of people around him to be able to convince South Africans who have lost trust, not necessarily in the ruling party, but also trust in politics in general. Because the danger and the problem that we're sitting with in South Africa, and we've seen it several times, you've got people, new political parties have been formed in the past, you do get independence, and all of them will come and promise whatever they promise South African citizens, and then afterwards, once again disappoint South Africans, and that's where the challenge will come from. I support the system, it is the right system, but we had to be realistic. It is going to take some time for that system to be completely realized in South Africa.
Letlhogonolo, I'll give you the final word here. Does this therefore mean South Africans should uncritically just take your word, yours, Mmusi, the Prof, and say, yeah, let's go for the constituency system without scrutinizing it a little bit more?
No, we need to. I mean, that's our role as civil society, you know. And you said once we adopt the constituency, and that's it. That's wrong. I mean, you know, democracy is not an event; it's an ongoing process. I mean, if it doesn't work, we change. I mean, I know you speak about the risk of policy fragmentation, but I mean, we need to fix the problems that we have. Otherwise, we'll be sitting with this problem forever and ever. So I think it's important to embrace the constitutional judgment and see how far we can go with it. I mean, it's currently sitting with the minister, and we'll see how it will be deliberated in Parliament and whether the Parliament chooses to endorse the system. I think we should give it a chance, and it's our role as society to foster voter education, so people are aware that there's actually independent candidates coming in, because you risk a situation where the system is reformed, but people still have that belief that only political parties are the ones that make it to Parliament. So we need to play our role in that regard.
I appreciate you all for coming through and helping us through this conversation. Mmusi Maimane, Letlhogonolo, Letshele, as well as Professor Sethulego Matebisi.